Excellent. Okay, so I'm very pleased to welcome Brian Salkowski, who is the president at eTeam, to join me on the podcast today to talk about statement of work, services procurement, the professional services angle within the workforce delivery ecosystem, and all things connected to that. Brian, thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, and thanks for having me on. I'm excited for the conversation.
Excellent stuff. So we're going to be looking at kind of understanding the mix, the different areas that are relevant to this kind of services procurement market. But before we get into that, you've had a really interesting journey and built up some fantastic expertise and experience from a provider point of view. Would you just be able to give a little bit of background on your journey through the industry, and also, new year, new change, what you're doing now?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. Appreciate it. So, yeah, for those not familiar, Brian Salkowski, it pains me to admit, but a 30-year industry veteran at this point, and I've had a fun journey along the way. So, in terms of services procurement specifically, my first exposure was actually on the technology side. Early 2000s with VMS looking to solve for primarily what I would call financial settlement for services leveraging a VMS, and moving from that into the MSP sphere where not only we're trying to facilitate it through a VMS or through a technology, but to provide a practice and consultation around it to ensure better buying, optimized buying. So visibility plus strategy coming together to do that. And in fact, built our first services procurement MSP practice back in 2009.
Wow.
And the way we did so is actually direct partnering with the customer. Procurement, they lent us people from their team, and we locked ourselves in a room to talk about what are the pain points, what can be solved through technology, where do they need additional resources, where is there the benefit of insight from external experts beyond their internal experts within this. And we built a practice that was very, very successful. And over a 15-year period, that practice evolved from that first client who was our willing guinea pig. I shouldn't use that term. Our partner in experimentation to the fastest growing part of our managed services business over the last 3 to 5 years. And then fast forward to today, as you mentioned, I just started a new journey with the new year as president of eTeam. For those not familiar, we are a comprehensive workforce solutions provider that has the capability globally to support the entire ecosystem from employer of record and independent contractors to staff augmentation, and of course, comprehensive project solutions for our customers. And so now I have the joy of working with our customers to deliver the services, not just help them scope the services.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I love it. There's always an element of circularity with these
Hmm.
journeys when you've been involved with an industry for the period of time that you have. And as you say, having covered the technology side of it, the service, setting up that service
Yeah.
offering within an intermediary service provider, and obviously then dealing with all of your customer problems when it comes to managing this spend. And now within that workforce solutions ecosystem, being able to provide the services as a different way of the organization engaging with you guys to get work done. So I think it's super, super interesting. And ultimately, all of this is about getting work done, isn't it? It's about
That's
productivity.
exactly right. So different flavors, but the outcome is all about how do we execute a client strategy and provide them the right talent, resources, and expertise to get it done.
And I think sometimes that gets a little bit overcomplicated. And when people look at the workforce solutions ecosystem and the providers, they can tend to kind of pigeonhole providers sometimes. Whereas
That's right.
ultimately, the organization is engaging with a service provider, an intermediary who's providing them expertise on getting work done effectively.
Yeah.
It's that extended capacity and capability. And it has to cover, ultimately, they need to be thinking about all of these angles.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. It's there's not a singular approach that is all encompassing. And so the details matter. What are we trying to accomplish? Does the expertise reside in-house or out of house, or a combination, which is probably the most likely scenario? Am I looking for expertise or a partner who can do this for me and manage to an end game, or do I need help because we're just resource strapped, or do I need someone that has expertise that exists outside of our current domain and needs to come in and provide support that we just don't have in-house? And in reality, going back to, it's not singular, very often it's all of the above. And so it's about working with the right people, partners, and technology providers to understand what the possibilities, start with the requirements. What are we trying to get done?
Yeah.
But ultimately scope out the avenues that are available that results in the best possible outcome, first based on the deliverable or the work that's being accomplished, but then also considering timeline, also considering cost, also considering reputation and compliance and risk.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was at a white paper launch in London recently, at the House of Commons, where it was all about looking at the impact of AI on the
Hmm.
workforce. It was really, really interesting, and it was addressing AI as almost like this digital workforce, which is augmenting all the different other workforce channels that there are. But one of the things I found fascinating about it was that it was kind of raising questions about things like, okay, if you're just focused on paying people for their time, what difference does AI make to that? In the sense that if Johnny is doing a piece of work that takes him 5 days, but by
Hmm.
utilizing AI, it only takes him 3 days. What's the focus? What's the correct focus? Is it time or is it output? And actually, it was joining other factors that are definitely expanding the use of output based or outcome based contractual agreements to deliver the actual work that organization needs to do. And I'm sure that must be something that over the span of your career, how have you seen that kind of change, that approach to like outputs?
Yeah, so I love the question, and I wish I was part of that conversation because it sounds like just a really compelling topic, and I don't actually think it's that future focused. The idea, and shame on me for not saying this earlier, but as we talk about those project solutions and teams and how it can be executed between internal talent, independence, solution providers, staff augmentation, you have to add to the list AI agents. That is absolutely part of how work gets done already today, and even more so, it's going to change exponentially over the years ahead. So, going back to your question, to say, the evolution to output, um, the addition of AI agents, which allow for, at least today, transactional and administrative work to be done very effectively and efficiently, and in turn allowing your talent to focus on higher level and more complex challenges and solutions, is just the first iteration of well, I shouldn't say, let me rephrase that. It is it is the continuation of a long trend towards output. And it doesn't mean that we never manage effort. I've talked about this in other conferences that I've been at, but I really see the pandemic as the accelerator there. Because if we think about, and you'll forgive me for opining here, but if we think about the historic workforce where you had a manager, a direct line of sight, literal direct line of sight, managing an individual and their work output and the execution of whatever their task or assignment was. Now all of a sudden that person is not in office. They're in their home. They're 100 miles away. They're 2,000 miles away, etc. And that work relationship has changed. They're not in line of sight. We're not managing it that way. The most effective way is to look at the results, to look at the output, to look at the outcomes associated with that. And although the services procurement marketplace was always larger than the staff augmentation, it's growing at a pace that staff augmentation has stagnated for 3 years now, whereas services procurement has shown continuous growth. And it's not by happenstance. And now you take the addition of AI agents in here that allow for that output, right? So now this project is 5 days, it's now 3 days in your example, but the work's getting done, and that individual is focused on higher value outcomes, presumably better work product associated with that. That is game changing. So to me, this is a long trend, but we just poured an accelerant onto the fire, and we're going to see it continue at a quicker pace.
Yeah, really interesting. Particularly when you talk about COVID being one of the catalysts for that.
Hmm.
I really agree with you on that, and I also think just the level of volatility and uncertainty and the speed of change that there is in the market. It just means that organisations need to be more flexible with their capacity and capability, and
Yes.
having the external opportunities to flex and be agile around that are just becoming more and more critical. And the ability to work to specific objectives can often be a real differentiator in how pragmatic and effective that organisation is, rather than in maybe slightly, should we say, possibly easier times when just having a bunch of people working on stuff was more acceptable. That could be kind of like a slightly open ended. The
Yeah.
pressure on organisations to deliver and compete and to do it at a faster rate in a more uncertain environment has never been higher, I would argue, than it is now, and has grown from that kind of pandemic
Yeah.
situation, together with that whole kind of change of work scenario that you so nicely described. I think a lot of these factors have combined just to make this much more of a topic of conversation, rather than something that people kind of theorize about. There's stuff that they're either rapidly putting in place, or they're scrambling to make sure they're on top of.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so we're agreeing on a lot today, Johnny, which is which is fun. Um and as you described that old world scenario, it was very linear, right? One person, their work output, etc. That dynamic is changing, and that puts new requirements in terms of what the commercial model is and how we structure this work. I'll tell you what I think, though, hasn't changed, although it very much lends itself to this environment, is the need for a level of assurance. So if I'm if I am in charge of a large project, in that old scenario we talked about, that assurance was on me in that line of sight management, managing their effort and output. Now, as we're partnering here and you're introducing AI agents, that project owner, that partner, et cetera, you're relying on them for that level of assurance. And there's a great value in that, right? So major project, impactful to business, organization, reputation. How do we structure this and manage all of these work channels to ensure not only is the output there, but there's a level of confidence associated with it and an accountability. And am I willing to pay for that? Of course I am. It's part of the reason I think we're seeing this trend accelerate is because there's greater partner assurance than in the old pure staff augmentation mindset.
Yeah, it must be super interesting from your vantage point, where you've been effectively providing, that kind of MSP service provider angle to help organizations look after their services procurement spend. You're
Hmm.
getting to see all the dirty laundry. You're getting to see all of the problems that happen, why relationships break down, why suppliers don't do the right things when they're delivering their services to their clients, and all of the reasons that, contractually or from a kind of relationship monitoring or performance monitoring point of view, why those sort of things fall down. That must be quite interesting to be able to apply that in terms of delivering the services into those customers yourselves,
Yeah.
at eTeam. How have you? What do you think you can kind of take from the kind of two angles that you've seen around this services procurement or statement of work driven world, where you've been helping people manage all the chaos that
Yeah.
they have internally, versus now you're on that provider side. There must be some good lessons you can take from that.
Yeah, great question. So I always think that the stories are ultimately what sell, right? It's how we relate it back to how do you find out what's possible? Well, you listen and you learn what have others have done. So I've spent a lot of time with customers over the last 15 years, and I've seen both, as you might expect, the best and the worst of what's out there. And so it's taking those experiences and relating them back to current customers and future customers as it relates to where there are opportunities and/or potential gaps in their business. And by the way, gaps are just opportunities that haven't been fully identified yet. So, by examples, as I just talk about storytelling, I can think about a customer I spent a good amount of time with in the last 6 months, and director of IT transformation, and they're talking about how they are engaging project services, and it's absolutely reactive. And the quote that came out was, um, I will if you can solve my problems, I will gladly pay you. It was just an open statement. It is worth it. And what we started doing is actually taking a look at how they were buying. And in some situations, it was really good. I already said this, so forgive the repetition, but in most circumstances, it was reactive. And so by actually taking a look at their statements of work and digging down into the detail, we could identify a number of trends. The first thing is it's never all bad. There was some really good, well-sourced work. There was some that was I would say at best puzzling because there was no detail associated with it. You had no idea what was being done and why. But as we work through it, you could come up with a number of different large buckets in terms of how they approach the work. There were strategic partner engagements that were well vetted, they were well competed, the requirements were clear, it was structured, and there was governance around it and technology to support it, et cetera. There were mid-sized projects supporting the major ones that were a mixed bag, and then there's a long tail, and the long tail from a commercial value was relatively small, but there was a lot of them, right, on an individual basis. And so if I look at that scenario, it wasn't a single solution. It was working with them to think about, okay, how, based on the value to the organization and where the projects stack in terms of materiality, ensuring that the right processes and support was in place for each. Right. So that long tail, they needed technology and they needed a way to help them efficiently manage it. They didn't need sourcing help. They didn't need category. They didn't need the rate benchmarks and intelligence because it didn't have that same thing. They needed a lot of that in that middle bucket to help them do so. And then they had another tier that actually had great governance around it, and they didn't need that same support. So your question was, how do you relate that back now to customers today as a provider? I said it starts with a requirement. What are they trying to do? Are they looking to quickly solve a pain today, or is there a strategic project that we need to invest in to understand those requirements, scope it together, discuss the art of the possible? And I can think about a proposal that we're working on right now, and they asked for solution A, and we will provide them solution A. But as we've spent time with them digging out the requirements, we're also offering them solution B and C that they didn't ask for because we took the time to scope, understand the field of play, and how we can execute for them. So both in terms of being able to relate that to customers, but then feeding it back into our own proposal response. I think there's great value in a client in that for a client. So you were thinking this one route that's got value, but did you consider that there may be additional options available to you?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think one of the things you spoke about when you were talking about more the kind of MSP service procurement management offering, scoping is a big problem for a
It's
lot
a
of
huge
lot of
problem. Yeah.
organizations. Like you say, you can get these confusing things where there's kind of nothing.
Yeah, it's puzzling. What did we buy and what are we actually paying for? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously projects change over time as well. So just
Mhm.
having that clear communication around what's promised and what's delivered at any point in time is such a benefit for both the buying organization and the service provider, because otherwise also the service providers can get really messed around in terms of just being hauled over the coals for stuff that is not there. The issue is not down to them. So it's helping to build these relationships by starting with a clear identification of exactly what everybody's kind of committing to.
Yeah, and accountabilities. And as you talk, and this came up in the scenario I just described, with that client as we start digging through it. You're right, supplier, it's easy to blame the provider, right? And they do tend to get raked over the coals, but a lot of that does go back to exactly what you're describing, the detail around the scope and the understanding of accountabilities, because the clients do have accountabilities too. And there are there's a waterfall, right? Supplier cannot move forward if they don't get sign off on requirements from the client up front, right? So if that date moves, then the supplier's date moves, et cetera. And so it's not just about building a quality statement of work or project governance that defines what the supplier's accountabilities are. It's also the customer's accountabilities and the governance by which they manage through those.
Yeah, and it must be really interesting also from your point of view, looking at how organizations approach the kind of decision around how to get the work done in terms of the options. So for you guys as a provider, there's various ways that you could fulfill work they need to do, with obviously one key area being this kind of project services approach. And it comes back to something you mentioned earlier, which was around liability, and in terms of the responsibility for the delivery of the work, rather than just people in place doing work. That's something that I think sometimes organizations or buyers can take a knee-jerk reaction to think it's more expensive to do it that way. But it's like, well, I would always play devil's advocate and say, well, how can you prove it? How do you know how long it's going to take if you just hire some people and put them in a room? Are there clear objectives? Where you're actually going with it? What and when is the end point? So that would be my devil's advocate on it.
What happens if it goes wrong? Yeah.
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 So the understanding, the acceptance of the cost benefit ratio, taking into account that moving that liability to the supplier in terms of the delivery risk, that makes a big difference for the organization. And that's where, as we were talking earlier about the different kind of work delivery channels, that's where the C-suite and the executives of the organization and that kind of workforce planning layer need to be able to look at all of their available options and say, what's the best way, as you say, starting with the work, what's the best way to get this done? And it's great to see more organizations really latching onto that now.
And that is part of that trend that we talk about. And what's I think an important call out here, as you were speaking, is that assurance, that risk transference from buyer to supplier at a premium. I think it's easiest to identify when there is a firm deliverable, but so many of the engagements are time and material based, which is okay. But there's still, if properly scoped, there still can be accountabilities, right? So what is it? So it's not maybe T&M, but what's the project management associated with that? Are there certain service levels that the supplier is making as it relates to those resources that they're billing for on a time and material basis? Do they have any accountability for the quality of the work output that their teams are delivering? So I often hear about it as it relates to deliverables based or milestone based statements of work, but it's not limited to it. And we come back to exactly where we were 5-10 minutes ago, talking about the importance of proper scoping and requirements gathering.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, what are the deliverables? They could be anything. They could be KPIs in ongoing service delivery.
Yes.
They could be blocks of consulting time, as you say, T&M effectively, resource. They could be sprints in an agile process. They could be pure project deliverables. It's very flexible, but the whole point is you're defining what the outputs are going to be, whatever they might be.
That's right.
And you're allowing that to change, and you're putting assurance and governance around it and clear expectations with it. When you look at how companies think, And I still feel like there's a legacy set of organizations in the market that struggle to think beyond time and materials, just in terms of
Hmm.
normal kind of like employees and contractors. Even that, and maybe that's a bit of a disconnect with their procurement teams in some cases, where
Yeah.
they will obviously be buying services in their IT services and professional services, etc. But where you've seen companies move more or be open to this idea, this concept of thinking more in terms of outputs as an option, what do you think is it that allows those companies to do that? How do you think more companies could kind of be open to that kind of that opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately aligning with how they get work done internally.
Right.
Yeah. So if and I hate speaking in generalities, but if the history is just, we hire people, we give them a job, and that's and we execute going forward. It's a lot different than when you think about, and certain departments and functions lend themselves to thinking this way, but and certainly IT, but you can think like marketing, for example, where there's a campaign, and so now you're supporting a particular campaign or a branding initiative, et cetera. They're organizing their work around that way. And so, to the extent that companies start organizing around specific objectives, right? As opposed to just a rote carrying forward of processes, that lends itself to it. So I think the best organizations out there are internally organizing work the same way they would expect their external providers to execute work on their statements of work for them.
Yeah, and I think also just triggered a thought in my head really in terms of what you're talking about in terms of the translation of the strategy,
Hmm.
the operational goals, and the actual work outputs that need to happen. Um, if an that's essential to any organization. You know this. When you're leading an organization, being able to communicate that strategy effectively down to all levels of the business and all departments of the business, so they can understand where they fit into that and how what they're doing basically contributes to that. That's strategic thinking, isn't that? That's
That's exactly right. So if I want 20% growth this year, I just say 20% growth and everyone work harder, carry forward, make a couple hires, we're going to do that. That's very different than saying for us to enable 20% growth, we need four key dimensions delivered upon, right? And here's how we're going to organize to ensure that each of those initiatives are executed against so that we can hit the overarching goal. Oh, and by the way, we need external help, we need additional staff support, et cetera. And now because we're organizing our work that way, we can partner where we need that support or expertise, or additional hands in order to be able to do it. So it starts internal and moves external.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I hadn't actually really thought about it and connecting it up that way prior to this. So I think that's a really good way to put it. Um, but it's just organisations really being effective, and it does take more effort, doesn't it? Let's face it.
Mhm.
If a uh, an organisational stakeholder needs to get something done, there doesn't need to necessarily be a huge amount of thought in terms of saying get five people in a room doing some work. Where it comes to really defining it and defining
Yeah.
what the end goal might be and bringing in the outputs that get you to that point. It's a front-loaded effort, undoubtedly, but it is a massive opportunity for better outcomes, quality, and I think also this is an area where technology can also be useful for people. It's the ability to write scopes of work and plan stuff. When you look at the large language models, what you can do on the large language models
Oh, it's
directly,
incredible.
how service providers are utilizing them to create a better user experience. Some of those things that were like that blank page, oh, where do I start problem, that
Yeah.
that, that is a big issue for a lot of companies that has been. That's really not really there anymore. So I think the excuses around you know designing the work in this way being too difficult or too onerous, I feel like they've kind of gone a bit.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it, but you're right. That excuse has come off the table because if you need you need to put your own fingerprints on it, undoubtedly, but the framework with the right prompts can be in your inbox in very short order. So that's a new dynamic that a couple of years ago wasn't even available. And you're right, it's front end loaded work, but effort that is well worth the outcome.
And just out of interest, with regards to this kind of this openness to output, outcome-driven work, have you seen your experience across the last few years? Have you, when you're looking at people running their own services, procurement programs, etc., have you seen particular industries that stand out as being very high adopters of this kind of output, outcome-driven approach,
Mhm.
or does it really depend on like the individual company culture and the stakeholders involved?
Yeah. I need to give a second thought about that. My immediate reaction is that it's less industry focused than it is individual players. However, and this does play back to the comment I made a short time ago, I do see functions versus versus specific industry verticals, right? And so I used marketing as an example where they're used to thinking about work in terms of campaigns or initiatives and programs. And so you'll see the same thing, IT that are involved with large capital projects and so various functions that have organized their work that way are used to it. But from a pure industry standpoint, in general, my reaction is that there are both leaders and laggards within individual industry verticals.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. I think it comes down to people making it happen at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Um, so looking at that kind of the contrast between pure outcome and pure effort, something that you said to me in a previous conversation, which I thought was really interesting, was that it's not necessarily a binary switch
Yeah.
between
Yes.
outcome and effort. Can you just explain that a little bit? Because I thought that was a really interesting and insightful kind of point of view.
Yeah. So yes, I stand by that comment. And you actually, whether you intended to or not, you gave me a tee up for this because you've mentioned a couple times that the work changes. And
Yeah,
I think that's the best launch point for an example where you think about, hey, we're launching a new we're launching a new application, and I need a solutions partner that is going to help us take accountability of launching this. But that work changes from implementation and deployment to maintenance. Okay, right? Very common scenario. Um, so when I talk about a level of assurance, what I need in that implementation for that go live is different than what I need from a maintenance perspective. I may need some effort to be associated with that. So there's a scenario that could start with a statement of work and a project deliverable that moves into staff augmentation because then we just need some extra hands and effort to support this. So that's a real easy cookie cutter example, but I think it brings it home. You can take it further and just say, well, even within that initial deployment, what resources do I have internally that have ability and aptitude to support this? Where do we not have the expertise internally? Where if we have a solution provider A that's taking the project ownership, where are some areas with where we can bring in contractors to support that effort, not necessarily where we need to pay the premium for them taking on the risk, but to supplement the work that's being done, transcribing information, any number of items. Where do we have AI agents now? We have to include that can plug in. So it is not binary. If we're sophisticated in terms of how we scope the project, it should be a combination of internal and external resources based upon and the external based upon expertise, role, and level of assurance, and it will transform over time in the example I gave. So, and with AI, the options are only getting greater to better understand where those skills sit in the right. Skills-based hiring is a big thing right now, where those skills sit internally, where they sit externally, and how we can craft leveraging AI, leveraging your provider's expertise, craft an ideal project team.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just changing so fast. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. Like I said, this discussion recently in Whitehall, it was just some of it was so theoretical that or it feels really theoretical, but it seems to be the rate of change that things are moving at currently. It feels theoretical one day, a few days later, it doesn't feel so theoretical anymore. It feels real.
Yeah, yeah. And listen, I've seen examples, live examples where it's really exciting in terms of the possibilities where based on requirements we can spin up leveraging AI very ideal project team based on skill and role types that fit in there. I had a client then take a look in their internal system, say, well, where do we have these skills? They identified individuals in their organization that have those skills that stuff to go, they have availability, access, etc. And so where would that fit into our ideal project team? And then where through our network do we have individuals to do it? So we're doing this live. We weren't doing this 3 years ago. Certainly weren't doing it 5 years ago. It's amazing to think what we might be doing 2 to 3 years just from now. Yeah, and
100%.
I think back to our conversation last month in preparation when we were talking about this conversation. I'd use the term then the future is hybrid, and I stand by that. This is the exact example where we can take a look at how we need to execute on this initiative, and then take a look to say where does that talent reside internally, what talent is needed externally, and what is the optimum sourcing strategy associated with executing, and then
Yeah,
how does it change? Yeah, as it evolves.
exactly. That's definitely a key question at the moment. So I want to kind of I want to come back to in a minute the just literally what you've just kind of brought that round to there, looking at this overarching strategy. Because I think there's some really interesting things kind of that play into the total talent kind of world and thinking around that up until recently was something I was always kind of a little bit like, oh, yawn, it's the same old thing, same old thing.
It's
But now,
aspiration. It was aspirational,
yeah,
right? Not real. Yeah.
it's starting to become more possible now. But what I want to kind of circle back to that in a minute because there was another thing that you said that I thought was really interesting when you were talking about the fact that it's not this kind of binary switch between output or outcome and effort. One of the things that I find interesting is that, and I've seen this within some organizations, is a desire within procurement to turn everything into comparable time and materials. So to say, this is all our contracting, this is what we're doing with contractors externally, and this is what we're doing with service providers, and I want to assess everything on the same metric. And I personally really struggled with that in the sense that I look at it and I go, well, there are definitely proxies that can be used to try and do some sort of comparative analysis on work, the seniority of the people required and how long it's going to take and all that sort of thing. But it's not a direct, you can't make a direct comparison because if you do try and make a direct comparison, you're not factoring in the risk and liability that the service provider are taking on or the intellectual property that service provider is bringing. It's not just work, it's work, expertise, knowledge, intellectual property, etc.
Yeah.
Is that something you come across on? I expect it to be something that you probably come across on both sides of the fence, to be
I
honest. But
have. Yeah. I have.
what's your view on that? Because I feel like it's an interesting and kind of logical step that people will make, but I feel like there's some challenges in it.
There's challenges in it. I wouldn't say that the comparators are useless, right?
No,
So having some benchmarks provides some good relevance for negotiation, for further exploration in terms of what the proposal is and what's being offered. So I agree with you. There's challenges with it, but there is also some value to really understanding what the delivery components are and where possible how that scopes out. But you in your question you already hit on a couple of really relevant points, which is if I take a contractor, a staff augmentation, and I try to compare that on a time and material base to the hourly rate that I have on a statement of work. straight away, one, I'm supervising that contractor in scenario A versus a provider who has a project manager, relationship manager who's taking accountability for that. They're presumably signing up for some service levels or associated. You mentioned the IP associated with it as well, and all these things not only have value, but they have impact on the work product, on the outcome. Um, and it also plays to the assurance that I talked about before. If this is a major project and I have that contractor there that I'm supervising, something goes wrong, that's on me. And for large project, do I want that, or do I want the confidence associated with signing on a PwC or a Deloitte, et cetera? They're bringing the IP with it, but they're also bringing a confidence and an assurance. And if we have a challenge, a solution to resolve for that. So the comparators are instructive. They're not definitive.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And it's something that will, as the kind of focus on this output, outcome-based statement of work world of delivery, as the granularity of the focus and the visibility improves, which is partly a process thing, it's partly an adoption thing, it's
Yeah.
partly a culture thing, it's partly a technology thing. That's just going to bring more information to bear and allow those comparators to be more valuable. But like you say, they're indicative, not necessarily definitive.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's still sensible for people to be trying to, do these kind of calculations as part of that.
Absolutely. So they can ask the question and have it answered and have a level of confidence associated with it. There's one, I've shared this example on panels in the past, but I like it because I think it brings home exactly where you're talking about as with a large financial services customer, and we're looking at their rates across their services providers, and they're like, well, company A is charging more for a manager level position than company B is charging for a partner in terms of the naming. And doesn't mean it was wrong. The partner from that company was small little boutique firm versus global provider that's bringing in significant capability and IP, et cetera. So it's good to understand that, right? Where can we send, and where does it make sense to send work to the boutique firm, because we're getting a good commercial advantage there. But it doesn't mean all work should be directed there just because the price is better. There's good reasons why we're paying this rate and engaging the big name global providers as well, right? So a surface level analysis, rate to rate, would have raised all kinds of crazy questions. But as we dug into the detail underneath it, there's good reasons for it, and the information could help fuel future proposal requests to understand where, based on the type of work, we could take further advantage of the boutiques or the local firms or the specialists versus the major players.
Yeah, and I guess it depends how long it takes as well, doesn't it? In the
That's
sense that
right.
there's
Yeah.
that classic comparator, consultancy X is cheaper than consultancy Y. Well, are they? Their rate card maybe, but depends how long it takes, and that's a perfectly viable
How long it
strategy.
takes, and can they execute the same project so that first firm can spin up a major project team and begin execution immediately? The boutique may not have the resources in house to do that, right? So there's a number of factors there. I stand by the fact that it's helpful. We were better for having those comparisons and being able to ask additional questions and think more strategically about how we source future work. But it was not. I'm being repetitive now, but it was not definitive. Yeah.
Yeah. So just looking at something slightly to the side of this, um, do you have in your mind, are there any particular criteria that you would put down as the type of companies that are ideal for you to be able to assist on this kind of output and outcome basis? Are there any particular criteria? Because I'm just thinking really around the complexities of delivering work in this way, in the sense that the service provider will be very adept at doing this because they're, as a service provider, that's what you're doing. It's your bread and butter to provide the services and do the work in that way. But providing that into those organizations, in some organizations, if you've got extremely bad processes, they may struggle to to adopt it, and that's potentially where you get a bit of a disconnect of stuff not being scoped properly and bad process. You must have seen plenty of that when you're looking at it from the management side.
Mm-hmm.
What's your kind of view on that in terms of what type of organizations are likely to be ready and what other organizations need to do to make themselves ready to be able to leverage this?
Yeah. Again, another great question, Johnny. Again, you again frame it organizationally, but where the work is consumed is departmentally or functionally, et cetera. So I tend to think there, right? So the organization, a procurement organization, they're a partner to the business, right? And they can provide a very, like, I love my procurement friends. They provide a very valuable service to the organization, but the work is actually being consumed in the particular departments or functions, et cetera. So those organizations that are best prepared, we're working with the consumers of the service, right? So we can go through and will go through, of course, a formal procurement process where it's appropriate, et cetera. But if we're not engaged with the business to understand what they're looking to accomplish, and if they're not willing to invest in that process to do so, we're not going to be successful. The other thing as a service provider is we need to clearly understand our field of play. We're not just an IT services provider. There's specific practices and areas of expertise where we can offer value, and in turn we can compete and win. It's not everything to everyone. So it's making sure that we're in the right field of play where we can be successful, but we're engaged not just with our partners in procurement, we want them, but also with the business, because that's where, when we talk about those details that matter on the front end, we're able to provide a better proposal and in turn execute for a better product.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's something that far more organizations are in the position to do this, but like you say, it depends on the individual stakeholders in a lot of cases. But I think there's far more of an expectation that this is just very normal and far more part of the typical way that of the kind of workforce mix that organizations should have. And also it's under more scrutiny now. If we go back to the management side, people want to know what's happening. They want the visibility on it. They don't just want to see a purchase order and are we hitting our budget? What projects are these companies working on? Are they doing a good job? Should we be using them for other work?
Yeah,
are we always using? Right. I don't know why poor Accenture, they always get used as an example because they're the first in the alphabet. But why are we always using Accenture? Have we got smaller service providers that are more specialist in, Accenture?
And that goes to the example that I shared, right? Where Accenture is one of those big ones. Does that make sense for that project or the other? And we do those comparators. And that's where, to give you a plug, I mean, certainly that's where a Zivio can offer tremendous value and intelligence in terms of helping to credibly inform that decision-making process. And that's where I think procurement can really partner so effectively with the business. You want these outcomes working together. We can help you craft that and also bring in the right tools and solutions that provide for a better buying and ultimately solution experience.
No, I really appreciate that, and completely agree with you. And it's it doesn't really matter how organizations do it, but they should have that data. Yeah. They should have that information if they want to operate strategically. The world operates on data now, and if most organizations haven't got access to that within their services spend, which is crazy because of the size of it. But it's kind of crept up on organizations because the world has moved more towards a service-based economy. We've moved more towards outcomes. It's also the question of actually just the pragmatism of how organizations get work done. And it's not just about dealing with the kind of procurement that was very much out of the manufacturing area of goods and materials. The services split, the spend on services is growing 5 times faster than the spend on goods. Yeah. So it's kind of from multiple angles, it's crept up and accelerated and become a big problem for people. And it is complicated. We talked about the technology side of it. I always relate the differences between buying goods, people, and services in that kind of, if you put them in those broad definitions. If you're buying people and you're buying an individual's time, that's one thing, and that's a pretty well solved problem with the vendor management systems and the MSP contingent workforce programs. If you're buying goods and materials, that's a simple thing that's easy to define and easy to measure, and the source to pay suites are very good at managing that because they can do your kind of guided buying, your catalog buying, and all that sort of nice procurement stuff. But the services are almost the opposite of both of them to a certain extent, in the sense that they're a really thick. I think it's quite difficult to define and therefore difficult to measure and compare. But the supply chain is relatively simple to it. So the focus has not really existed on services procurement until now. And a little bit like I'm going to come on to with the total talent management kind of side of this. It's always been something that kind of, you go to the conferences, it gets rolled out. It's kind of similar conversations every year. It's really moving forward now, genuinely, which is super exciting. Services providers are helping that. The fact that more work is moving this way, the fact that within the workforce solutions ecosystem, organizations like you guys, like eTeam, are providing services on this basis, is just making it more relevant and more a part of the conversation of actually making things happen. And that
to be cliche, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And so why is it getting all the attention? Because it has to. It's too large of a category of spend. It's too impactful to organizational outcomes and initiatives. So ignoring it is not a possibility. It's just not.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to competition as well, because if you're ignoring it, your company is ignoring it, and your competitor is not ignoring it.
Oh, yeah.
Their agility, their ability to get things done, the kind of horizon visibility they'll have on skills and capabilities that might be coming down the line that they're going to need within their supply chain, their relationship with their supply chain, where they could be really partnering with a supplier to say, look, this is the stuff we've got coming up. You're doing a great job on all this sort of stuff. Can you do X and Y? Maybe the supplier can, or maybe the supplier can put those capabilities in place, upskill their own workforce and capacity to deal with that. And where that plays into the total talent management conversation, which I find really interesting, is I had a great chat with a lady called Lisa Williams from Dow Chemicals recently. And she was talking about this at a very strategic level, but actually really meaningfully putting this sort of stuff in place. But the reason that they can actually do that is because each of their individual work delivery channels are effectively being managed. And without actually, the biggest gap for most organizations is the services procurement element of it. You can't do total talent management if you haven't got the individual streams that make up the total talent management under control. So now that services procurement is genuinely being addressed by technology providers, by service providers, by organizations themselves, with the assistance of their supply chain of service providers, that makes it possible. And it comes back to exactly what you said. Start with the work. And it kind of it leans back to what you were saying around this kind of idea that the future is hybrid. It's horses for courses, really, isn't it? What's the best thing? What's the best way to do it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I like your terminology, work channels. I keep talking about functions, but it really is. What are the work channels? So that organization is ready because they have their work channels properly organized and the right engagement. So it's a great example, and it's really good terminology because it clarifies exactly what we're talking about.
So looking at it from your point of view, from your lens in the market now, one of the things that you've mentioned previously is about this kind of hybrid situation, is about people, but it's also about thinking strategically. With the way that you're providing your services into your customers, and your broader view of how customers can sometimes get this wrong, in terms of looking at their whole kind of like services supply chain, has that made you approach anything particularly differently? Or is it added anything, do you think, to your approach in terms of having all that background knowledge of seeing all this visibility behind the curtain in lots of organizations? Has it triggered any things in you where you're sort of thinking, well, we're definitely not going to do that, and we definitely want to make sure we're one of these type of suppliers?
Yeah. So it definitely, so this is day four. So when we say what has happened so far, hasn't happened, but my go forward view is definitely informed by my history, to say the least. And there's a couple things that we're not going to do. You already heard one of them, and it's about discipline and practice around practice areas. We're not all things to all people. Can't be. Talking in a lot of cliches today, but we all know the phrase, "Jack of all trades is a master of none." Right. So it is about ensuring that we have our practice areas well defined and the disciplines associated with it. It's also which came up a little bit earlier in the conversation, but knowing and understanding the provider space. So, as you mentioned, Accenture, top of the alphabet. We're not going after Accenture's $100 million project. That's not our space in the marketplace. They have a valuable role, and we have a valuable role within our market segment. So it's a practice discipline, but it's also market segment and ensuring that we know where we can offer the greatest value for our customers, and happy to let is probably too strong a word, but happy for Accenture to dominate where they dominate and they do exceedingly well. The other thing that we will do, and I don't think others do enough of this, but as I look across our various product slash solution areas, it's bringing the best of those to our customers. So in other words, we are not going to put ourselves in a singular cocoon. This is a services project. We have the ability to engage through our platform independent contractors to supplement that. We have the ability to provide an outcome-based solution, but augment it to the client's advantage and to our advantage with additional contractors, right? So we will be proactive in terms of bringing the best of our entire ecosystem to a customer and not get hyper-focused on where it started.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess coming back to your point about not looking to be all things to all people, the side of it that sometimes I think people take for granted is the scarcity of good quality suppliers, particularly delivering in quite technical areas, in the sense that we've seen over the last few decades this increasing war for talent within permanent hiring, and then it's expanded out to the contingent workforce. But it's become so critical now, and it's extended into this supplier space as well, that I think that also lends weight to the importance of these relationships, these supplier-client relationships, and organizing services procurement, so you know who your suppliers are, what they're working on, right, where their skills and expertise lie, and what they're good at, and who's doing a great job for you. Because suppliers are going to have to be, to a certain extent, choosy as to who they work with. They're only going to have a certain amount of capacity.
That's right.
And so potentially that, again, there's that war for expertise for organizations looking to bring in expertise within their supply chain. So I guess from your point of view, as a provider in that area, it means that those relationships are really important, where you can work with those customers that are willing to go to that level.
Yeah, it's critical, right? The technology is allowing us to do a lot of things. It's not allowing us to replace relationships, and so that is a hyper focused area. And it's part of the reason why those specialties, the focus is critical, because the relationships are so valuable. If I do wrong, if I overextend, I put everything at risk. And so working to invest in those relationships, it means having a firm understanding of what we can do and do well, and what we shouldn't do, for the benefit of both parties.
I like it. I think it's super exciting seeing you make this transition and have that lens that you can bring to this, because just being able to, like I say, kind of go behind the curtain within these
Yeah.
organizations. It's such an eye opener when you're trying to solve the problem on that end, and you see the way these things operate, and you see the problems it causes for the organization, but also potentially the way that causes problems for the suppliers as well. I think it's really
Yeah.
interesting to see you being able to bring that plus your wealth of workforce solutions expertise to what you're doing now. I
Thank
know I
you.
really appreciate you coming in and having a chat, and it's great to touch on some of these subjects, and it's an interesting debate that I think is useful for people to hear because I say your vantage point of being able to look at this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation, and as you say, early days, new start,
Yeah.
exciting times ahead. It'd probably be really interesting to maybe check in a little further down the line and see
Yeah, this
how
was a lot of fun.
progress.
I was actually going to say let's do it again. So consider it an open invitation. I really enjoyed this. Um, Covered a lot of ground, and not only that, you gave me some good fodder. I'm going to take some of your terminology. I really liked it.
Likewise,
Yeah.
excellent stuff. That's superb. Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Johnny. Have a
Cheers.
great one.